Hey y'all, I'm Wild Child, and
And I am Majesty, Audrey Afro Deity. You can just call me Audrey.
this is our first test recording of our podcast. And this episode is going to be about unlearning behaviors from childhood. So, what are these behaviors? These are patterns we've learned since we were a child. And some of these patterns we may learned from our parents, from our friends, from our mentors, also at school, from our peers, from our teachers. Also from society, from what we watched in television, from the media we consumed when we were little. And these patterns, we may have not entirely been aware that we were learning them. And they have become so conditioned into our brains, really deeply embedded into our unconscious, that they stay with us for the rest of our life. Like even up until adulthood, we may not even be aware that these patterns are playing out in the way we perceive the world. They shape our perspective, the way we interact with people every day, and the way we relate to people from the past in our lives, the stories we tell ourselves about these relationships. Not only are we talking about in this episode about the behaviors from childhood, but we're talking about unlearning the harmful childhood behaviors. Why would we do this? Well, our goals and the goals of this entire podcast is to foster radical compassion for ourselves and for our others, and to understand what self love really means. Self love, we hear a lot, and it is an action, loving of the self. But I also believe it's an embodiment.
Mm.
It becomes from I love myself to I am love. And this is the goal of this episode and the entire podcast. So we hope that you enjoy this ride with us.
Yeah, excellent introduction. Thank you, Wild Child. Yes, all of that. And I would add that the goal of this podcast is also to connect our discussions just to like a wider look at society in general. So I'm located here in the United States. I'm actually in Massachusetts, and Wild Child is actually in the Netherlands. So we're geographically dispersed, and hopefully that will make our discussion all that more interesting. We're deeply interested in kind of connecting these discussions to wider takedown of harmful structures in society, criticizing capitalism, racism, or any kind of bigotry, prejudice, and just trying to foster a wider movement for, yeah, like Wild Child said, radical compassion, self love, mutual aid, harm reduction. We're trying to make the world a better place here, guys. We might as well be wearing superhero costumes. So, yeah, I'm excited to get started.
And we're going to kick off with an anecdote from each of us to talk a bit more about ourselves. Like Audrey was telling me earlier, what better way to introduce ourselves than to start with our childhood? So, my ethnic identity, I am Filipina. Both my parents are from the Philippines. With the colonization of the Philippines, I think I have a bit of Spanish or Portuguese and Chinese in me. But my parents immigrated from the Philippines to America, particularly California. When they were young, they had three kids. The youngest was me. And so I am Filipino American. I was born and raised in America. I was very Americanized. So culturally, I do feel very Filipino, but my national identity, the way I project myself in the global world is as an American. Growing up, my father, he is a tennis professional, and tennis was the tool that helped him reach his American dream. And these are in air quotes because there's no such thing as the American dream. Talk about that later. And tennis is the one that helped him reach a life of success. He faced probably tons of prejudice. He was an immigrant to a new country. Even though he was young as a teenager, he probably had to do a lot to fit in. He probably didn't feel like he had a lot to offer, but tennis was one of that. So I remember growing up, because it was my parents' choice that me and my sisters play tennis, having practice until 10 p.m. in the evening, not being able to go home because I had to get 10 forehands perfect, like in a row. They had to be perfect. He wouldn't let me go home until they were perfect. So tennis is a very much perfectionist sport. But this kind of drilling almost every day into my mind was like, it has to be perfect so I can go home. And that carried with me for the rest of my life. And a lot of people struggle with perfectionism. And We become perfectionists often because of the way our parents raised us. It could be a different story. A parent expected you to have A's. A parent expected you to play piano. There are many, many different ways our parents want the best for us, but they end up drilling this pattern in our mind, intentionally or unintentionally, that we have to be perfect to be good enough. This is a behavior that I have tackled for 17 years to unlearn, and I'm finally really truly understanding it, and that's what I want to share in this episode. So,
Oh yeah,
you,
oh yeah. Awesome.
you Audrey.
Thank you. Yeah. Awesome introduction. Yeah, exactly. And I think yeah, it's so interesting thinking about your experience with your father and pretty much being forced to engage in this activity kind of relentlessly,
Hmm.
kind of without mercy, and
Hmm.
kind of also keeping in mind this context where your father is a first generation migrant from the
Hmm.
Philippines,
Yeah.
and he has this pressure, right, to
Hmm.
succeed, to fit in. He wants to achieve the American dream, and he wants that for you, his daughter, as well. And I think it would be interesting if we could look at that from the lens of what that means specifically as, a Filipina American, right? Maybe we'll talk about that later. And me, I'm Audrey. I am based, like I said, in the United States right now, in Massachusetts specifically. And I have been in Massachusetts since like fifth grade, pretty much, like 17 or something years like that. I've been here for a while. And um, my legacy is that uh, of a Black American, right? I am Black American, and my family has lived in the United States as Black Americans for as long as I can remember, as long as I know. In fact, I actually don't really trace my lineage back outside of the United States. No, so um, yeah, we're bringing it all the way back to chattel slavery for Black Americans in the United States, right? That's our legacy. That's my family legacy. And when I discuss my childhood, I think a core childhood pattern of mine that I engaged in, I guess that I will talk about today is self pity. I very got, I very quickly got caught in some pretty toxic loops of self pity. Just reflecting on my own suffering, and that suffering was in large part tied to my mother's own suffering as a single Black mother in the United States, raising four children pretty much on her own from very early on. Yeah, pretty much from the time we were toddlers. She was by herself, and this was due to conflict, domestic conflict between my mother and my father. And also worthy to note that my siblings and I share different fathers, right? So there's my sister and I's father, and then my two younger brothers, who are twins, and then my sister and I are twins. So my two younger brothers, they had their father, and then my father, my sister and I, who are the older twins, we had our father. My younger brother's father was incarcerated, so unavailable to support us. And then my father was abusive. There was actually a lot going on between my parents. And over the years, I discovered there were reasons for the conflict, but I pretty much came down to the fact that my father was abusive and unable to operate at least cooperatively with my mother as a father. Lots of fighting, pretty big fights, and that led to separation. We left. We moved all over Oregon. We moved to the south, and we did eventually come back here. And throughout my very young childhood, pretty much all the way up until very early elementary school, I just pitied myself a lot. I would cry a lot. I guess that was tied to just compassion and empathy for myself and my own experience. It almost got in the way of um, being able to process my trauma and my pain related to, the domestic disputes to my parents and other trauma that I experienced as a child. So that's what I will be discussing today. Yeah, yeah,
Thanks for sharing,
yeah,
Audrey.
yeah. Thank you, Wild Child.
I think self-pity is a really complex pattern because to me, it sounds like also something of the ego. I mean, you hear this expression, first world problems. Is that the kind of self-pity you mean?
Not so much first world problems, but very much me being, and I guess you're supposed to be somewhat, right? It was very much me being the subject of my own story. Um, it was very much so that for me, the thing with self pity was I lost myself in it, right? It made it hard to actually deal with stuff. You know what? And maybe this is one of my childhood patterns. Maybe I'm being very hard on myself, right? And maybe I'm doing a bit of judging myself. It was self pity, but really trying to do is have compassion for myself and empathy for myself and understand my own feelings and experience.
So
Right.
it's like the pity would be wallowing, and
Exactly.
then the compassion would be healing, moving forward from the pain instead of staying in the pain.
Right. Exactly.
I see,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
So what we want to do in this episode is discuss how to identify some core childhood patterns. We'll each go through some of the more patterns that we identified that stem from our childhood, and maybe this would help the audience, you, the listener, start recognizing your own. They will be different. Everyone is different. We each have our own patterns. There's no copy paste solution for one's childhood patterns, but identifying them is the first step for freedom and choice. And next, what are you going to talk about, Audrey?
So I did select self pity, but I kind of do want to touch on what was very foundational for me in terms of the patterns that kind of manifested themselves in later my teenage years, my adolescence, and then later in adulthood, young adulthood. Was there's two. There's a sexual abuse that I experienced early on, right, as a child, and then um, abuse from my father, then and then there's also that corporal punishment that I experienced, not from my mother, who's very loving, but did punish us, with the belt at times, right? Among other things that
My
we
father too.
really, yeah, yeah. But yeah, I'll be starting with self pity, and then hopefully I'll be able to explore some of the more gritty stuff. And I do also want to talk on trauma, and then connect that trauma to broader issues like racial trauma, parenting, community support, and harm reduction, and kind of destigmatizing survival as well. Yeah.
Diving into these core childhood patterns, how we can identify them. The pattern I mentioned earlier was perfectionism, but there's another pattern that was really prevalent in my family, and that was codependency. So, codependency, as I understand it, is when one person is completely reliant on another person in order to meet their needs. And this was like fact for me because growing up, my mom needed me and my sisters to always be around her, to be near her, close to her, to always accept her as she is because she is our mom, even if we disagreed. And my dad's motto was it's my way or the highway. Number one, listen to dad. Number two, check number one. So this kind of codependency in the family was a fact of life where everyone was intermeshed with each other and needed each other in order to exist. It's more than just doing errands together. It's like a needing thinking that the pretense of family is so important to go on family vacations. I'm also very privileged to have been able to do this, but to put on the appearance of being a family because family was so important. I didn't even learn what being a family really meant, except that we needed to be together to do everything together. And when one person was upset, it was everybody's problem. When mom was in a bad mood, we couldn't approach her, we couldn't talk to her, and we needed to wait until she was in a good mood or something. These ways of relating to each other were so normalized that I began to adapt those ways with friendships and how I related to other people later in my life, like in high school and college. Like, I remember one time my friends in college went to New York on a weekend trip and I couldn't go. And they sent me videos and pictures of their time. And I thought for some reason they intentionally left me out. And I got mad at that. Like, why would you rub it in my face? See, that is codependency. That is not being able to be happy for your friends or the people you care about doing their own thing without you. So this codependency also appeared in my relationships too. And how did I how did I get free from this? It was only until it was quite obvious in a romantic relationship that I was completely codependent on the other person to provide all my needs, like my happiness. When I was upset, I would expect him to fix it. This is not a healthy relationship. But it first came to me like identifying my needs. I feel upset right now. And it's not about somebody else making me happy. It's fixing the problem. It's about how do I fix the problem? I
Mhm,
never learned these tools from my parents. So identifying my feelings and also knowing like, do I feel like this because I'm choosing the things I want to do, or am I choosing them to make somebody else happy? And that's when I saw, okay, yeah, my mom was such a people pleaser. Like she was doing things like pouring out her love, being so self-sacrificial for the children, for her husband, because she needed other people to need her. So there's a kind of manipulation at play here when you make yourself so valuable to the other person. You do everything that the other person needs. So they become so truly dependent on you. You feel like they're indebted to you.
mhm,
Like they cease stop existing and their pure existence is to pay you back.
mhm,
That is not relationship. That is codependency. So identifying like, am I choosing to clean the dishes, or am I choosing to cook dinner for me or for him so that he would love me? And
mhm,
actually, I don't wanna clean the dishes, I don't wanna cook dinner. So I had to learn how to set my boundaries and be
mhm,
like, "No, I don't wanna do this, I'm tired. No reason needed." And these were tools I started later learning once I identified my feelings, my choices, set my boundaries, and how to say no. So then it came into learning how to be assertive. And this we could talk further on in like a whole other episode, but basically I learned how to step into my power and find that power like deep into my core. And why is it so hard to say no? And this ties into like also the reasons why people have burnout. It's more than people pleasing, like it goes back to your core childhood pattern. Why is it so hard to say no?
mhm,
What does no mean? I couldn't say no to my father, and I had to learn how to say no, but first I had to say yes to me. And this is why, like, when we start noticing the problems in our relationships and we circle back to where they started from, we can really start unraveling these harmful learned behaviors and applying these tools to heal our childhood wounds, and then learning how to relate to others in a healthy way, which is when you truly know that you have freed yourself
mhm.
from the pattern.
I love that. Yep. And I hear you, you're speaking on patterns of codependency. I think you touched on transactional analysis, how relationships
Mm,
can become transactional, right? You spoke about how your mother would perform perform service or perform actions uh, to as a tool of emotional manipulation, right? To later
yeah,
to use that service as a hey, you're now indebted to me, right? You now owe me
yeah,
because I showed you this, I gave you this attention or love, or I did this thing for you. So now you owe me, and it now became a tool of control rather than simply an act of love or kindness, right?
exactly. Yeah,
And
yeah.
so, wild child, I'm super interested if you could tie that experience, with codependence, emotional manipulation in your childhood, and even draw that back to your experience with your father and being forced to play tennis, back to your experience as now second generation
Mhm.
Filipina, right? And what might be some behaviors from your parents, yourself, and other members
Yeah,
of your family? What might that mean in the context of a Filipino American?
yeah,
Mm.
totally. Yeah, this is important because we play out these patterns in our interpersonal relationships, but also in our social dynamics. And as a kid, my society is my school. There was a statistic somewhere that I read that girls strive academically, really, really strive, sometimes more than their boy counterparts, because there's a need to prove oneself. And so, how does it tie into codependency? Well, codependency, if you look at it, it's like, how do I get my needs met from somebody else? So, by performing and exceeding an expectation, the hope is that my needs of feeling validated and loved and important will be met. and this time it's by the school, by the institution. So as I navigated social spaces from school, um, yeah, to eventually work, it was like I was codependent on the institution to provide me that validation, which I never was able to provide for myself. And my mistake, well, I learned from, I thought I was always constantly seeking validation from my dad. But the thing is, my dad could never give it to me because he didn't give it to himself. And also, his society could never give it to him. I mean, his society that had become American society. As a Filipino migrant, he would never be good enough in their eyes because he had to be in the society he lived in the city he lived in was white and Jewish and rich. It's never gonna happen. You surround yourself with people who you think are successful, thinking it'll rub off on you, but true success is when you set your own performance by your own standard. And again, that opposite then of codependency would be freedom within relationship,
Right. And
because we all relate to each other. We need relationship, but we
right.
can be free within one. Yeah.
And like independence and interdependence, right? Right, rather than that reliance on the other, more leaning
Yeah,
towards cooperation. Thank you, Wild Child, for sharing that experience of codependence that you had with your mother, maybe even a bit with your father, and even with your own education and the educational institutions that you were raised in and somewhat forced engaged in, right? All of us, right? Somewhat we can bring that back. And I was just curious about bringing that back to your identity as a Filipino American, your family's identity as Filipino Americans, and then your status as second generation migrant and your father as a first generation migrant. And you mentioned your mother using that codependence in her own acts of service and love for you all as tools of manipulation, right? And I'm
mhm,
wondering if you could tie that into womanhood, the Filipina and Filipino American experience, maybe like a wider discussion of those two aspects.
for sure. It goes back to my mother's mother, her mother. Stories I heard from my mother saying my mom grew up feeling ugly, felt like the ugly duckling. Her childhood behavior that she learned that the woman in Filipino culture is supposed to take care of the husband. She's supposed to be at home cooking, cleaning, right? These were her domestic responsibilities. And these were the characteristics of a good wife who was valuable. So this was the mindset she had coming to America in her early 20s. So when she met my dad and they got married after 3 months of being together, like she fell right into that role. And I even fell into that role in my relationship, my past relationship, without being aware of it. And it turned into something like her fulfilling all the domestic responsibilities and having a full-time job on the side, completely losing herself in the role as a wife, as a mother, and completely taking the self-sacrificial quality of love, which I believe is part of love, but to such an extreme where I don't know how she survived. So I think the resentment that just built up over all those years turned into something like, "What would you do?" And this is what she would say, "Oh, you what would you do if I died?" Like that.
Oh wow.
And yeah, I don't even think she remembers saying this, but her being a Filipino migrant to America, entering the workforce, becoming a mother, trying to keep up the appearances of a happy family, trying to keep a husband home when he would go out late at night and she was alone with the child. Like, I don't know how she managed to do that, but there was some conditioning happened to her where she said, I have no choice but to suffer. There is no way out to
Right.
endure this, right? And she took on so much sacrifice, and for what? For what? For love, I think. But what she gave back to society because of her sacrifice, she gave the opportunities for her 3 young girls to get a good education, to have a life that she couldn't have. She wanted everything for us girls, and she would even say to me now, "I taught you girls how to stand on your own." And I think she wanted that but she didn't know how in her lifetime, and maybe she can still learn, but she gave me the stepping stone to learn how to do it because I had therapy and she didn't. So, like, migrants, immigrant families, they are doing what they do for the future. Like, that's what's so beautiful when you choose to be a migrant, especially when you plan to have children, like, you're looking for opportunity for a better life for yourself. But if you have children, you will put everything aside for the children, for them to have a better life. At least that's how it is for Filipino immigrants, and I know other people with immigrant parents could say the same.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
does that kind of
I
answer your question?
That does, it does. That's brilliant, actually. Yeah, and thank you for that. Thank you for sharing more and connecting that back to Filipino American experience and then the experience of
Yeah.
womanhood. I heard those aspects. I heard the pressure uh, of being a woman in a domestic relationship. I'm sensing this. I'm sensing an archetype that might have been passed to your mother
Mm,
you know,
mhm,
from the Filipina experience, right? Of what it
mhm,
means to be a woman, and specifically a woman who's married to a man. I'm sensing patriarchy here at play, right? And I'm wondering
mm,
what might have been different for your mother and maybe her daughters if she had different archetypes or different examples of a woman in a relationship with a man, or not even necessarily in a relationship to a man.
yeah.
What does it mean to be a woman, a Filipino American woman, and successful in America as a first generation migrant, right?
Oh my gosh, so many things.
So many things, yeah. So yeah, um,
So many things I think she fully could have envisioned, but the
mhm,
things I take away from my mom are the softness, the
mhm,
compassion, the empathy. And in the Philippines, I
mhm,
everyone like is like told me, and I haven't been since I was 5, that Filipinos are very welcoming. They
yeah,
welcome you to their home and they
yeah,
wanna feed you. Like,
wow,
this kind of welcoming, this hominess, I have that, and I hold that. But what my mom didn't know is that you can have a soft front and a
mm,
really strong back, and it's
mm,
possible because, like, it's just knowing, like I said before, knowing what am I feeling? Like, is this my choice or is this somebody else's choice? How do I set my boundaries? How do I say no? As long as I live in alignment with
mm,
that, I can practice that kind of openness and caringness in relationships, which I feel like I'm most natural at doing while also protecting myself and
mm.
having freedom within relationships.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love that so much. Exactly. And now I'm actually interested if you can identify some healing tools and practices that might
Yeah.
assist you in kind of overcoming the fallout from these childhood patterns. Maybe you can offer some tools and practices for other people, other listeners who might have similar experiences. Yeah. What do you think about
Right.
that?
Yeah, so I would say first accept exactly where you are.
Mm,
You are exactly where you need to be
mm,
and when you need to be. That's
mm,
the first step. 'Cause then you enter the now, and change can only happen now. Of course, it's hard because we look back and we regret and we look forward and we
mm,
worry.
mm,
But thing is, everything takes time, but at the end of the day, like, the moment is all we ever have. So it's in your own timeline and
mm,
things will unfold for you when they need to unfold. So
mm,
you will get the information you need at the time that you need to get it.
mm,
And when you accept yourself now, you might see yourself in a relationship that you don't know if it's the right one, if you're
mm,
repeating
mm,
childhood pattern, let it be. Let
mm,
yourself play out what you need to play out because
mm,
unconsciously you may be trying to test what is really my motivation here, what is really my need here. And we all do what we need to do in order to feel safe, in order to get our needs met. Keep doing what you're doing because the priority is that you feel safe, you feel secure, and you deserve that.
mm,
Okay. And then I would say that when you start feeling unsafe, it's a signal something is not right. What can I change in my situation to get that safety? And what is within my control and what is outside of my control? And when you identify what's within your control, try to focus all your energy on that. So, like, healing wise, like, can I write down my thoughts this morning to get them down on paper? Can I check in with myself later today and journal what I'm feeling? And can I ask for help from friends or mentors or what resources do I have at school or from my work to help me understand my needs better? Because once you start understanding your needs better, and you can also identify what can I choose to serve my interests. And it might seem selfish at first, but at the end of the day, we're all trying to protect ourselves and help ourselves so we can show up better for the people that we love. So you're really doing it for everyone else, but you have to take care of yourself first. And reach once you reach out and find resources, rely on them. We cannot achieve anything alone. We need a team, we need a network. And when you build that network, then you can rest because you have support. You keep going on with your life. And then it kind of you just adjust and pivot and then adjust and see, oh, this is right, this is not working. And then you start building emotional resilience, and then you start getting a better picture and understanding how the patterns are playing out, and how to how to change them, how to question them. And also then maybe when you're ready, like, start rewiring the pattern. Take the negative thought and change it with a positive one. So for instance, I can't do this alone. Like I feel so alone. And then change it with like, no, there are people there who love me, who care about me. I know this. And they would want me to take care of myself too. So I'm going to do that just for today. Those little things that we can change. There's so many ways that we can change the way we speak to ourselves. And soon it will just become a new reality.
I love that. That's perfect. Yeah, thank you for that, wild child. And I hear that, right? I hear this call for self-acceptance for people who might be
Mhm.
experiencing this childhood pattern, the one that we're discussing here, related to codependence, passive aggression, emotional manipulation, and the need to kind of, with that self-acceptance, to kind of let yourself play out, right? Let yourself work through your patterns kind of organically and naturally, and to connect with resources for self-healing, and awareness and mindfulness, because I think you do run the risk of becoming trapped in your patterns, in your trauma, if you're not acting out with the intention of becoming better, right? Being
Mhm.
mindful, and actually working through your issues to achieve healing, right? And become the
Mhm.
person that you want to be and that you see. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Acceptance is
Mm.
number one.
Acceptance. Yeah. Exactly. True. 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 Cool.
And do you want to dive also into how self pity maybe was a learned behavior? Was it from your parents? Was it from your
Mhm.
environment? Like,
Mhm.
how did you learn self pity?
The self pity, I probably picked that up from my mother. A lot of that actually. Now that you bring it up, I hadn't made that connection, but yeah. My mother, she always reminded us of her own experience, right? Herself growing up in an abusive household with abusive parents, and suffering various forms of abuse, physical and otherwise. And then also her experience as a single mother and raising us on her own.
Mhm.
She was constantly making us aware of the difficulty of that situation. And this was usually when we had done something to disappoint her. Maybe we had failed to clean the kitchen or our rooms, or maybe we had been fighting with each other, or maybe we were performing poorly in school or acting out in school, whatever it may be. It eventually would come back to, it's kind of like, yeah, you're making, like, I'm already enduring this suffering, this difficulty. I, you, my children, are making it more difficult for me now
Mm.
with your behavior, right? So, and that served the purpose because it made us aware of our circumstances, and kind of now we need to learn, we're not just taking care of ourselves, we're taking care of each other. I'm taking care of my mother, and we're kind of enduring this difficulty together, even as it inspired guilt and shame. So yeah, there's kind of this, I guess, adjacency of love and discipline, or an education. So then now I kind of inherited my own self pity, is what I call it, where I got trapped in this permanent state of victimhood. Maybe I didn't have the tools to be proactive about what I was experiencing. So maybe the self pity was a way to deal with my helplessness. And in fact, helplessness was a big theme when I'm sitting, ruminating on these my experiences, my bad experiences, my shame, my guilt, and crying, and thinking, kind of um, how hard I have it, right? How hard my mother had it, But a lot of it was about me, right? I actually developed other tools to deal with this experience of being the child of a single black mother, right? A lot of things changed when it became apparent that I was especially gifted when it came to academics, right? When it became apparent that I had the ability to succeed at school, the self pity, I lost it almost. I kind of became a favorite almost amongst my siblings because of my academic success. I actually became a role model for my siblings. We would all show ourselves to be very, very capable of succeeding academically. Even as I stood out as an example of academic success, my sister and my brother specifically also performed well in school. So
They say that it's important to have a growth mindset
yeah,
when faced with any difficulty, to be solution oriented. So,
right.
would you say that the solution you found was through school, which is why you were able to unlearn the self pitying? Like, what was the thought
Mhm.
that changed everything, if there
Yeah,
was?
yeah. Yeah, exactly. So the self pity kind of dissipated when it became clear that my experience wasn't going to be solely one of misfortune, and difficulty and hardship. It was quickly becoming clear that I was actually fortunate in that I had the gift of my mind. I bring up self pity because it highlights my tendency to ruminate, and I'm working through this as we're talking.
Okay. Oh, wow. Wow,
Yeah,
that's amazing.
yeah, I'm literally working through it. That's why it's kind of hard. So I hope I don't ramble too much, but
You're great.
thank you. Yeah, so I bring it up because it kind of highlights my tendency to ruminate. And from self pity, I was getting depression, very, very early signs of depression were starting to manifest, around the time, maybe just after elementary school. So that was coming in. And there was this transitional phase where I was very emotional. I would have emotional outbursts at school, right? And I was also beginning to empathize with others who could not display the same academic gift that I had. I remember specifically an example where a friend of mine got in trouble, whereas for something I think we were both engaging in, but I didn't get in trouble with it, but they did. And that kind of stuck with me. I kind of stood up for my friend and was like, I don't understand why they're getting in trouble. Like, I'm not. So there's that. There's the coming depression. What I specifically want to highlight is just the impact single motherhood can have on children, right? And I'm using my own experience as an example. But culturally, single motherhood is a, you know, infamous trope for Black America and Black Americans. The absence of fathers in young Black children's lives continues to be a prevalent, was and continues to be a very prevalent issue for Black Americans, right? Even to this day, my father's notably absent in my life. Right? So this is a source of trauma, right? And it comes from lots of places. My own father's experience as a Black American man and how that did not prepare him for fatherhood. I could make the case that neither one of my parents were prepared for this experience of having raising children. My mother had us very young. She was 21 when she had my sister and I, and then 18 months later had my two younger brothers. So very young, very much a young adult herself, very much still learning how to, navigate the world still as she has to also protect and nurture children and teach us how to navigate the world. Very much a core part of my experience was this awareness that my mother is also trying to figure it out, that we're actually figuring this out together, right? And in my adolescence, this manifested as a lot of pressure, right? A lot of pressure to succeed academically, especially as things became more challenging, weren't so easy, and I mentioned right this growing depression is growing. It was increasingly apparent that I had a certain amount of apathy and indifference when it
Mm.
came to um, academics. I was able to succeed because a lot of the material was easy enough, and I also appreciated the praise. Right, I liked the attention, the validation. Right, even the love. Right, love, attention, and validation and acceptance
Right.
that came with
Yeah.
performing well academically.
They'll love you if you get an A, but not if you get a C.
hmm Yeah, exactly. The challenge really came when I got a scholarship to private high school. Things became particularly challenging then because I actually went to boarding school and I was separated from my immediate family and was living at school pretty much full time during the year, even though I was still close to my home. So yeah, what my mother was specifically trying to do was highlight for us uh what we are going through. The fact that we are impoverished, right? A frequent theme of her, I don't know what to call them. The word coming to mind right now is lamenting, like lamentations. Um, was that we were one paycheck away from homelessness, or she would frequently bring up that she was working full time now. For example, she'd be like, "Oh, how easy it would be for me to, pretty much suggest that she could engage in prostitution." Or she might say how hard she has to work and question why she has to come home to children who misbehave. Pretty much disciplining us through shame, right? For our inability um, to behave. I lacked parental affection and reassurance and validation and love. She to shame us for our misbehavior, and just what was missing for us was parental validation, love, affection, reassurance. I, at least for example, didn't feel these things, and it made it difficult to meet my mother's expectations in terms of keeping the household clean, not fighting with my siblings, performing well in school, handling chores and other responsibilities around the house. Yeah, so um, we talked about my own patterns of self pity, right? And rumination on my own suffering and issues as a way to self soothe and comfort myself as I experience hardship and pain and shame and guilt.
That's a very huge of you to acknowledge. I just
Mm,
wanna say that,
thank
like,
you. Yeah,
just saying that, speaking it out into existence, it takes away its
takes the power away uh,
power away.
the trauma from the trauma. Yeah, but
Yeah.
now, now typically, I think for me, how the childhood trauma might have manifested in maladaptive patterns in adolescence and early adults was a tendency for like emotional outbursts to very suddenly explode emotionally and act out, and that could be like crying uncontrollably because another student took my seat, or lashing out at someone who was annoying me, like physically, and like biting them or exploding. And like I trashed the classroom one time. Yeah, I say that again.
Unmet needs,
Unmet needs. Yeah,
like,
exactly.
struggling with something and you couldn't express it. The expression of anger or explosion of emotion was
Hmm.
maybe a behavior you mimic
Yeah,
from
exactly.
your parents.
And yeah, yeah. And what characterized these tirades or outbursts was the silence beforehand. The inability or difficulty of expressing what was affecting me and going on with me was, I think, very much the precursor, right, to these outbursts,
Wow.
right? And that could be related to the shame and the guilt, not feeling that I was entitled or even capable of expressing myself in a healthy way, in a way in which I didn't have to explode, having difficulty expressing that my classmate was annoying me or agitating me.
How would you say that as a Black man in America, you
Mm,
were encountered situations where you felt ashamed or you felt like your needs were not being met or you couldn't understand the situation you were in?
mm.
How did that end up maybe triggering an episode?
So, well, first, I'm non-binary, right? Now I identify as non-binary, but as a child, I was just a black boy, right? But even as a child, I was plagued by one, this emotional sensitivity that I marked as unmasculine, right? I cried a lot, and I couldn't help myself from crying, and I was ashamed, and well, not ashamed, more embarrassed when I would break out into tears, and I displayed my emotional sensitivity. But as a young black child engaging with masculinity, I found it difficult to achieve vulnerability, and that actually came out with my siblings because I was actually quite abusive, like physically abusive to my siblings.
Mm.
And that abuse would become a pattern all the way up into uh, college, actually. As a young black child trying to embody masculinity, specifically also that as I'm the eldest child, along with my twin sister. But because I was assigned male at birth. And then also probably combined with my academic success, I was definitely seen as the eldest, and as the leader among my siblings. And I found that role difficult. And eventually I would very much fail in that role, just being unequipped, needing tools of like vulnerability, compassion, empathy, to the ability to soothe, rather than to lash out. That was lacking in my masculinity. So here I'm specifically talking about my masculinity, and trying to avoid putting boyhood on myself, even as it was put on me, right? Which is somewhat, even now, self-reflecting, somewhat dysphorically, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. But
Historically, like
so kind of not in match with my true gender expression, even as a
mhm,
child, right? Not that I was
mhm,
exceptionally feminine or especially feminine at all, or in some way didn't embody masculinity. In a lot of ways, I very much embodied masculinity. But just that not having to feel pressure to embody boyhood and masculinity so prevalently might have given me more room to express my emotions and just achieve the temperament that would be more comfortable for me, right? And along with other things that came, having to be a protector and tough and brave, very much
mhm.
things that I struggled with. I've talked to you about a child before about my experience with my father abusing my mother and then forcing me to be complicit in that, at one point, and then very much there failing ultimately even before I was aware of my role as a protector and someone who's supposed to be.
I was just thinking, so as a
Mm,
child, were prone to these outbursts of emotions, also
mm,
something learned, but something you didn't know how to express,
mm,
and then having that black boyhood
mm,
identity thrust on you when
mhm,
it was not in alignment with your true gender expression, and then having it almost like suffocated those
yeah,
emotions.
yeah,
Maybe they became internalized,
yeah,
and then you engaged in the same coping mechanism that you somehow modeled after your mother, but for you, it manifests as self-pity, right? Like that
yeah,
cycle of shame. And
mhm,
it almost became a place of safety because you could escape maybe from that black boyhood identity that was thrust upon you.
yeah,
So that's maybe why you feel a sense of self-soothing. It's
mhm,
like your pattern.
mhm,
That's the pattern learned in childhood,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
And
exactly,
then
yeah, mhm,
yeah, and I didn't mean to interrupt, but story you were telling about you feeling made complicit in your
mhm,
father's abuse of your mother
yeah,
further only made you feel like you failed to be that provider again, a protector, and a expectation thrust upon you based off your
yeah,
physical identity. That too is like another rejection
yeah,
from society.
yeah,
And
exactly,
but these are not your choices.
yeah.
You know that, right?
Right, not wholly at least. As a child, we're pretty incapable of being mindful about our behaviors and mitigating harmful behaviors. Right? We pretty much just expressing what we pick up from our environment. For
Mhm.
me, I picked up on violence. I picked the need for control, on emotional outbursts. These are the things I inherited from my parents, and somewhat repression. Right, I inherited these things from my parents. Right.
I remember in college, like back in 2016, I
Mm,
remember you were going through a hard time and you were
mm,
very quiet.
mhm,
And then suddenly you would just like burst, not aggressively, but you just maybe scream
mm.
like out loud. It was like, oh, what's going on? Like
Yeah.
talk, use your words,
Right.
but you couldn't. You
Right.
didn't know how. You needed to go through it alone. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
it.
Yeah, exactly. So you're already, yeah, exactly. You're seeing how this kind of manifested later, in my
Hmm.
young adulthood, right? Um, the
Hmm.
silence, the repression, the inability to express myself, and the tendency to act out instead rather than to find healthy like coping mechanism. And I guess what I want to kind of wrap this up with self pity, just to highlight my tendency to ruminate. But what was so foundational about it for me is the way that self pity became other things. Self pity kind of became shame and guilt. It became survivor's guilt at one point.
Hmm.
It became depression. It became, addiction. Drug abuse. It became self deception. So it all was born from this. lack of affection. We talk about lava, specifically
Mhm.
when we talk about lava, love,
Mhm.
attention, validation, acceptance. We talk about giving ourselves that, but we also expect it somewhat from our parents, specifically in our family. And I didn't receive that, not in the way I needed, right? The
Mhm.
affection, the reassurance. So I gave it to myself as a way to self-soothe. So maybe I might be wrong in calling it self-pity, but it was very much a lot of pity because I did grow. I guess I grew to test it somewhat, which is why I characterized it as self-pity, just because it did kind of trap me in this kind of victimhood
I
mindset.
had it too.
Yeah, really.
Because I wasn't getting validation or attention or being seen from my parents, so
Mm,
I kind of felt bad for myself, and I had a right to feel bad for myself, but because I felt so bad for myself, I wanted to somehow prove to them how much I was hurting. Kinda
right.
like flipping it. Like, my mother would be like, "I sacrificed everything for you girls," and
Mm,
then that was
right.
the way she got validated by us, and then I wanted to show my parents, like, "Look how much I hurt myself. Look how much I starve myself. Look how much drugs I do. Look how much random sex I do. Do you now I'm hurting?"
Yeah.
So that was also self-pity.
Yeah. Right. So true. Yeah. Yeah. Great connection. Wild child. Exactly. And if embracing the mission, kind of the goal of our discussions in this podcast,
Mhm.
just to tie that back to wider patterns in our culture, our society, and our institutions, where what you and I share was this burden placed upon our parents, right? And this kind of our own parents' trauma, their inherited responsibilities, even their sacrifices, and how that manifested in us, on us, around us, and affected our
Yeah.
own development and who we became as people, right? How that might be alleviated is through one education, teaching young adults strategies to deal with trauma, to deal with emotional difficulty, to learn how to express and self-soothe and cope, and to offer that to their loved ones, to be able to offer affection and love and attention and compassion and empathy to loved ones as a way to foster healthy community, healthy households, healthy families, and we can bring that back to wider discussions of racism, how our parents were made othered in the society, and how that affected their own relationships with us, how their own
Yeah.
disenfranchisement, right, economically and maybe even somewhat social, and exclusion from kind of the American dream, that formal economy that was supposed to offer that white picket fence, type of,
Yep.
yeah, right,
Front yard.
yeah, front yard and a dog, right? Happy experience. How our families were excluded from that. Yeah, from that stereotype, that phenotype, or that archetype of American livelihood. And this is
Mhm.
through your identity as a Filipino American, my identity as a Black American. We kind of inherited this marginalization, and it's itself, and you can see, Wild Child,
Yeah.
how personally that found expression in our
Yep.
childhoods, our childhood patterns, and our trauma, and
Well,
how.
that archetype played out, but there are also distractions you can sort of say, or like it's almost like American society provided other coping mechanisms to further alienate the self from
Mm,
feeling one's emotions. So
mm,
I'm talking about
yeah,
consumerism.
right. Yep.
Uh,
Mm,
we can even tie into the food industry too, shopping for food waste.
mhm,
So yeah,
yeah,
eating food you don't know where it came from, how ethically it was produced, the whole
right.
supply chain of it.
Mm, yeah,
Also, we can look at the sex industry, how it exploits sex workers.
yeah,
These are all strategies I think society also
right.
gives to people to avoid confronting themselves,
Mhm.
just taking it way further, which is where we want to touch on, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. I think you're nailing it on the head. So the question here is, what could our society, what could America have offered us and our families that would have alleviated some of our suffering and trauma and pain, right? We can talk
Right.
specifically about, I mentioned education and support for American households, right? We lack that in our current. I'm a huge critic of capitalism, but even within capitalism, we do have the capability to provide an income that would allow a parent to be able to support themselves and their children in a way in which we're not producing these toxic environments. And
Social benefit,
so
right?
exactly. In your experience, I'm curious what you would identify as a need for your family that kind of that could have, alleviated some
Mhm.
of, yeah, of your
Yeah,
own. Mm,
integration from my parents,
yeah.
mentorship,
Mm,
finances, house ownership, parenting classes. I mean,
mhm,
like, yeah, English lessons.
mhm.
Uh, Also, yeah, definitely understanding how to manage money,
Right.
and also safety nets from getting into debt. It's like
Right.
America's giving
Mhm,
out credit cards like it's
mhm,
candy because they
mhm.
want families, individuals to be in debt.
Yep. Mhm. Yeah, and I'm curious because a lot of what I got from your story, you mentioned the need for your father to make sure that his daughters had a life better than what he had, and he expressed that through this demand of you guys that you engage in this pretty grueling training
Mhm.
regimen, like for tennis, one that actually didn't agree with you, right? And in that, I'm kind of sensing that your father kind of missed the point here, right? What it would mean to actually provide the life that he wanted for his daughter. He's very much coming from a place of love, in a sense, but one that was sort of misguided.
Mhm.
And I know it definitely seems that your father kind of embodied somewhat of a patriarchal role, the role of a patriarch in your family, right? And so I'm wondering how, in his own upbringing, if he had been shown examples of maybe a more balanced, healthy male or masculine, model, and maybe was
Mhm.
better able to identify the needs of a human being, right?
Right.
Emotionally, in terms of what is needed to nurture and support and provide that happy, loving experience for his daughters, for humans in
Yeah.
general, for himself, right? I wonder if he had gotten more of that in his upbringing, how that might have alleviated some of the suffering that you had to inherit, right? Um, and
Also,
you know, mm,
education is so expensive in America.
yeah,
It's
mhm,
like thinking there's no way I can afford that for my daughters, but they
right,
can get athletic scholarships.
yeah,
So
mhm,
the motivation was good, but the
mhm,
actions were misguided, but also lack of like understanding how the American education system works. I
mhm.
mean, how could he have known?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And then if I had to offer like healing tools and practices for anyone experiencing similar to what I had to deal with, I would very much say for me, writing, even as a young child, writing was definitely an outlet for me. And kind of offered expression and insight where I wasn't able to express verbally to others and my siblings, my mom, my parents. I was able to find expression on the page, and that pretty much remained the case throughout my adolescence and young adulthood. Writing was definitely a therapeutic tool for me. Tools that I would use now for parents, I would say very much reassurance and love and affection, giving that to your child. And for single mothers out there or single fathers, for single parents out there, you're struggling, you're working full time, and you're coming home and your children may be misbehaving, or they're not doing their chores, or they're not performing well academically. I want you to keep in mind that one, they very much do sense your pain and your hurt and your own suffering and the difficulty of their experience. And I would encourage you to continue to share with them in loving, affectionate ways what your socioeconomic situation is. Very much seek to teach and nurture resilience, understanding, and empathy and compassion. And I would encourage acceptance and patience. I would discourage physical discipline or disciplining through corporal punishment. And rather, I would encourage discipline that would achieve resilience, would give your child tools to be able to cope with their situation. But I think it's very much important that your child not look to you as a source of suffering and pain, but rather someone to go to when they need reassurance or love or affection. And I know that can be difficult to achieve. And then for older folks, very much, writing, very much doing the work of healing. A lot of these books, they give you tools to be able to love yourself, to be able to not see your current situation as your own failure, right? It's not your own failure, but rather maybe the result of a society or world that has failed you or that is failing and that has not sufficiently evolved in a way to actually support the real needs of human beings to be loved and understood and nurtured and supported and allowed to be productive and loving in ways that are healthy, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that is what I would offer for now. Yeah, and
Positive note.
yeah,
Thank you, Audrey.
yeah,
That was beautifully said,
mm,
and end on a positive note, there
Mhm.
is freedom from the pain
Mm,
in the past through healing. On this healing journey, it's continuous. It never ends, and that's okay because it
mm,
becomes more like it becomes like a victory lap. Like you keep going and you have the fuel and the strength to keep going. You build the emotional resilience. You
mm,
learn to choose for yourself and you learn forgiveness for yourself and for
mm.
others.
Yeah, love that.
Thing is that when we are able to learn from our parents' mistakes, our own mistakes, we
Mhm,
carry so many lessons, so many
mhm,
life skills that we take for the rest of our life
mhm,
and that we can apply to all the rest of our relationships and
mhm,
we can teach to others. Because like Audrey said, the world has let us down.
mhm,
And I'm not being pessimistic here. It's just the reality
mhm,
of the world we live in. We live in a broken, oppressive world.
mhm,
So by becoming aware of it, we can actually find freedom from it while living in it. And
mhm.
then we can become actors of change to
Right.
make the world a better place. There is liberation here and it's available to us now. And choosing it is the first step. Well,
Exactly.
acceptance and choosing a
Mhm.
better life, a better world.
Exactly. Very well said. Wow, child. Yeah. So yeah, and I think that pretty much concludes the podcast. I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add to close up.
It was amazing.
Yeah, that was really good. Thank you guys for listening. Hopefully, you found things in this that were helpful or engaging as much as we found this helpful or engaging, even for myself, even just recording this. Very much inexperience, yeah, outreach, advocacy, and self-resolution, right? Self-actualization and healing. So I hope that you guys found that as well.
Same here. Recording it makes it feel realer,
Yeah,
more real.
sure.
We're ready to share our story out
Yeah,
there with the
yeah,
world.
yeah.
And even though it's not perfect, even though it's our first, we're gonna get better
For
and we're
sure.
gonna try.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as perfection. It's only here we are and it's good enough.
All right, everyone. Love and peace, and yeah, more to come. And I hope you guys enjoyed the podcast. Thank you for listening.